Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is James Nevitz. I am co-chair of ORN, the Outdoor Recreation Network. In my day job, 9 to 5, I'm also the Senior Public Access and Recreation Advisor for the Ministry of Defence. Thank you ever so much for joining us today on the our ORN Climate Resilience in Outdoor Recreation webinar. But before we start delving into the content, some of you may have noticed that ORN are on hunt for a new co-chair. We have a departing co-chair, Pippa Langford, who's going to be leaving us at the end of the year. Pippa was unavailable to attend this morning, unfortunately, but she's very kindly put together a short video giving her thoughts on her last 5 years, a 5-year tenure with ORN, and what it's given her, what it's brought to her. Taking part in the role and actively working within RO and yeah, if so, Jane, perhaps if we can play the video, that'd be excellent.
Hi, I'm Pippa Langford and I've been the Outdoor Recreation Network co-chair now for 5 years. It's been brilliant, but next year I'll be going part-time at Natural England and I think it's time to move on, to give someone else the opportunity to take the network forward. It feels a bit strange to be looking back over the last 5 or 6 years of my involvement with the ORN. Back in February 2019, a colleague had persuaded me to take up the Natural England role on the exec committee. Outski had just taken over the secretariat, and straight away we were putting together the next one-day event on accessibility called Open to All, which ran successfully 4 months later. Back then, Fiona Groves was our excellent chair, and Bridget Hall and I became co-vice chairs. But then COVID came along. Fiona got busy with a new job, and rather than try and run a selection process for a new chair when everyone was so busy, Bridget and I stepped up to be co-chairs as a temporary arrangement. The co-chair arrangement worked really well. 2 heads are better than 1 after all. So the exec committee decided that having co-chairs is a good way to run ORN. So Bridget and I stayed on as co-chairs until 2023, when Bridget stepped down and James was appointed to the role. I'm very grateful I've been ORN's co-chair. It has been one of the best things I have done in my whole career, to be able to help by making the network work. The role has prompted me to step out of my busy day job, to look up from my desk, to look out from Natural England and Just England, and to look forward. I've learned how much we can get done when we work together. Being co-chair isn't about having the answers. It's about making sure the wealth of expertise in the network gets heard. And that means listening to people about what's working and what's not working, and what they need to know more about. But I'd like to finish with a few thank yous. To the Secretariat, Elizabeth, Jane, Bev and the others who've helped out. They do a brilliant job. They know the subject and they are great at all the admin, thank goodness. They are the engine that keeps us going and they bring so much energy to work, it's amazing. I'm really going to miss our Monday morning sessions. To the exec committee, thank you. Tim, Lee, Fiona, Katie, Jonathan, Kevin, Joe and Sophie. Thank you for all your insights and focus. You've been fabulous. To my co-chair, James, thank you for being a great co-chair, for picking up the stuff I couldn't fit in, for bringing your experience and your gentle humour. Thank you to everyone who's presented on a webinar, conference, academic research group, action planning event or Christmas event. I can honestly say I've enjoyed them all and found them all useful. And finally, thank you to everyone who's come to one of our events. I hope you found it useful, that you've met lots of people and had the time to connect and build your own network, to share your knowledge and experience and learn from others. That's what makes ORN so special. So if you're considering applying to be the next ORN co-chair and want to chat, then please get in touch. It will be one of the best things you do. And in case you're wondering, I'm not going far. I'll still be on the exec committee for a while.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jane. Thank you, Pippa. And I fully agree with everything that Pippa said there. Really is a fantastic experience being part of ORN, certainly co-chairing ORN feels quite a privilege. So if that's inspired you, if that's made you think, yeah, I'd really like to consider that, then do use the QR code that you can use to see on the screen there. That will take you through to how you go about applying, a bit more information as to what the role entails. If you've got any questions at all, please get in touch, because we'll be more than happy to have a chat with you or answer any questions via email. So yeah, please do get in touch. That QR code will appear again at the end of the webinar. Right, so on to the agenda. So yes, today we're going to be looking at climate resilience. Climate change, as I'm sure you agree, is a big old topic. So this will be the first in a series of events that will tackle the subject in line with ORN's 2025 to 28 action plan theme, managing the impacts of climate change. Today, as I say, we're looking at climate resilience, and we have with us a Begonia. Here we go, Begonia Pedreira-Regueira. Apologies for that poor pronunciation. Begonia is our Defence Infrastructure, the MOD's Senior Climate Resilience Manager. Begonia, with a little bit of help from me, is going to introduce the concept of planning for climate resilience and highlighting how it can relate to the outdoor recreation sector. And then we have with us Andy Mackintosh, Natural England's Senior Specialist in Public Access, and he is going to expand on this with an introduction to Natural England's Climate Change Adaptation Manual. Then at the end of our presentations, we're going to have a chance for some Q&A, but please don't wait until we've reached that point. If you've got any questions that crop up as the presentations run through, please chuck them in the chat pane and we'll address those towards the end of the webinar. Just to remind everyone, the webinar is being recorded, so we can share the resource post-event, should you wish to look back at the slides, etc. Great stuff. Okay, on to the next slide, please. Yep, so just to remind you, my name is James Nevitz. Yes, I am Senior Access Advisor for the MOD. Can we run into these slides, Begonia? Here we go. Fantastic. There we go. What's the next slide after that one? There we go. Yes, okay. So climate change is absolutely happening. There's no doubt about it. We can see evidence of it locally. We can see it with our eyes nationally, in the news, internationally. So how do we begin to plan to mitigate against these changes and ensure our sites, our customers, the public can continue to enjoy our outdoor spaces long into the future? To put outdoor recreation to the context of my role, as mentioned, I work for the MOD, and the MOD is a significant landowner and land manager. The Defence estate is extremely varied. We have all manner of landscapes, coastland, upland, peatland, chalk grassland, you name it. We can probably find it somewhere in the Defence estate, and it is all essential for defence. I mean, that's the priority. That's why we have it as a landowner. But it's also covered in a vast array of designations, environmental and historical designations. Some of that land lies within nationally important landscapes, such as Dartmoor and Salisbury Plain. So as you can imagine, with that comes an enormous amount of green space that many people enjoy, be it through statutory access or such as public rights of way or permitted access. So public access is very much part of being a significant landowner, as you can imagine. Considering planning and managing climate resilience into our estate is a key part of our strategic development, our estate care and management, and our day-to-day business. And so public access inevitably fits into that. Perhaps, for example, where we've got sites that are coastal, where we're considering coastal erosion, or perhaps riverbank erosion, where public access lies adjacent to it, or of course wildfire management. Everybody on the call is going to have different priorities with regards access provision, access delivery, public engagement, estate stewardship. But in light of these impacts of climate change and the increasing extreme weather events we are all experiencing, underlying our priorities, we all need to consider our staff, our sites, our infrastructure, our visitors and all outdoor recreation participants. So how are they being affected by the changing climate now, and how might they be affected in the future? And with that in mind, what tools and processes can we adopt to plan, adapt, and develop for the future? So that's a very good point for me to stop waffling and for me to hand over to Begonia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As James has introduced me, I am the Senior Climate Resilience Manager for MOD, specifically for the Defense Infrastructure Organization. So my role is quite focused on infrastructure, although I do help other parts of the organization as well. But my primary role is to support infrastructure teams understand what climate resilience might mean for them. And that includes not only England, it includes the whole of the UK and also our overseas locations. And as James has indicated, we've got a very diverse estate. Is an amazing playground, really. And we've got my responsibilities, or the teams that I support, include not just the green space, but also all of the buildings. So when it comes to understanding climate resilience, we need to think about all of those buildings. And as you probably are aware already, that diversity of the state includes things such as airfield, naval bases, but we also have our own offices, hospitals, and even schools. So very diverse state. Now, I'm going to move on to the presentation, and if you excuse me to save on bandwidth, I'm going to turn my camera off, but we'll see each other back again in the question time. Also, I'm going to share my screen, because I've got the habit of having animations, and let me check that it works first. Okay, one moment. Oh yeah, it's moving. Can you see the screen moving?
Yeah, that's all working, Begonia. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, great. So climate resilience, as I'm sure you are all aware, is obviously different to mitigation. But to get us started, I thought we'll start with some definitions. So climate mitigations is about reducing climate change, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also about doing it in a time frame that is sufficient to adapt naturally, or for ecosystems to adapt naturally, and to ensure that food production is not threatened, for instance, among many other things. While climate resilience is about being prepared or getting prepared for climate change, precisely because the speed or that time frame at which we are mitigating is not actually sufficient, or it hasn't been sufficient, at least as we speak. So the goal is to reduce climate change, reduce the harmful effects that this could bring, especially to ensure that food production is not threatened, again, among other things. And then the actions that we need to take to adapt, to build climate resilience, some of them are actually similar or could be done in conjunction with mitigation, as well as wider sustainability. So there are many synergies that need to be considered there, and many opportunities when we are implementing other sustainability measures to think about resilience as well. But there might be new things as well that we need to do, and that is what we need to understand. Because as you know the climate has already warmed up about 1.2, 1.3 degrees globally. This warming has not been exactly on average across the board. So the far north has warmed a lot faster, already about 2 degrees warmer. The average for the whole of Europe is 1.7 degrees. The average for some of our overseas locations, like Cyprus, is 1.5 degrees, and the average for the UK is also about 1.2 degrees. And we know, this has been already observed, that this 1.2 degrees in warming has already led to increases in all natural hazards, but space weather. Some of them are very clear, like heat waves and flooding, as I'm sure you are aware. However, there is also some signs or some signals that changes in climate might also exacerbate seismic activity and other things such as pandemics. And the thing to remember here is that all of the extremes are intensifying. We also know that if we meet, well, we're going to meet the 1.5 degrees of warming by between the 30s and 50s, and it's going to be quite challenging staying at that level by the end of the century. But we also know that at the 1.5 degrees of warming, there are high risks that will impact upon us in things again such as food production and water availability, and that if we don't stay at the 1.5 and we reach the 2 degrees of warming, then those high risks actually become very high. And at some point as well, between the 1.5 and 2 degrees, we start crossing reversible thresholds of change, such as the melting of the Arctic and the melting of glaciers that are obviously an important source of water. And as we speak, we are still on the path to meet 3 degrees of warming, at which we are actually crossing even more thresholds of reversible changes, such as the melting of the Greenland and the West Antarctic ice sheet, that if we were to lose them, I mean, completely, that melting will mean another 66 meters of sea level rise globally. That will not happen overnight, but it's obviously something really critical to consider in our mitigation efforts, but also from a climate resilience point of view to understand how extreme some of those risks could become. And I won't go into the detail of the 4 degrees as we speak, but obviously more thresholds will be even crossed then. And a key message from all of this, as I said earlier, is that all extremes are intensifying. Global warming is obviously the average for the entire planet, which then means that conditions at the regional scale will be more extreme. And just to give you like a past example, but this is obviously a very specific example, not a strict climate change example. Back in 2010, the year was actually one of the warmest on record. Since then, it's been superseded by many other years, warmest years on records. And in fact, 2010 is not on the top 10 years anymore that are the warmest on record. However, at the time, it was globally, but it wasn't one of the warmest for the UK. And specifically, December that year, we experienced in the UK, as well as wider Northwest Europe, a very intense cold snap. And at the same time, there was a heat wave in Canada with and other parts of the world. So the blue dots in the map represent the areas colder than the average for the 1960s to the 1990s, while the red dots on the map represent the areas that are warmer or were warmer at the time than the 1960s to the 1990s climate average. And some of those red dots in Canada, they were actually 10 degrees warmer than they should, than the climatic average for the 1960s to the 1990s. So these changes can mean extremes globally. And just because the trend is towards warming, it doesn't mean we'll never get cold snaps again. And to give you just a more scientific example, the evidence around how the warming of the atmosphere and other parts of the planet, such as the ocean and the Arctic, is increasing in helping us understand how these are leading to more extreme weather. And in this particular example, we know that the warming of the ocean is leading to more extreme weather globally, and in particular for the UK and Northwest Europe. This will mean more intense cool snaps, more intense precipitation and storms. This doesn't mean yet they're going to increase in frequency, but when they do take place, they'll become more extreme, especially when it comes to precipitation. We know, for instance, that the number of days that is raining in the UK has reduced, but when it rains, it's more extreme. And a bit more on that. 1.2 global average, 1.2 UK average. But then if we look at what has been happening at the local scale, we know those extremes are becoming even more extreme at the local scale. So when looking at the changes for the UK between the 1960s and 2006, it can be appreciated that that 1.2 degree like average increase for the entire country, it actually meant close to 3 degrees already in some areas of the country in the summer and winter seasons. And similar to precipitation, you probably have heard before that winters are becoming wetter and summers are becoming drier. However, if we look at the local picture, some areas in the UK have actually become wetter in the summer and others drier in the winter. So completely different to the average. So again, really important looking at the locality. And just to give you another example of the fact that 1.5 degrees of change can mean quite big changes at that local level. If we look at the year 2022, it was one of the warmest years on records, and many areas of the country they were 1.5 degrees warmer than the climatic average for the 1960s to the 1990s. But if we look at July specifically, some areas of the country were actually 3.5 degrees hotter on average for over the same period. And if we look at 19th of July, specifically, there was a very short heat wave at the time, and many areas of the country reached between 30 to 40 degrees. And this actually led to about 2,000 excess deaths. So very short heat wave that led to about 3,000 excess deaths. So very significant changes. So 1.5 on average, many regions achieving 40 or near 40. And in the same year, we also have a colder than usual December. So again, reinforcing that message about the extremes. And just a bit more information on heat waves for you to go back to. But heat waves like 2022 heat waves are actually projected to become as frequent as occurring every other year by the 50s, and obviously they have impacts on human health that are important for outdoor recreation. And as I told you on my second slide, it's not just about heat waves. There is evidence that it's affecting absolutely everything that we do. It's going to affect everything that we do, including outdoor recreation activities and infrastructure. And it's not just a risk for the future anymore, it's happening now. And obviously will affect more those being born today, but it's already affecting us now. And when you think about the users of the outdoor recreation, you will have many people on your 70s or older, you will have children, both groups being vulnerable to all of this extreme weather. So how do we prepare? Well, we start by identifying our risks and then planning how to manage for those risks. And I thought I'll use the UK climate change adaptation cycle to help us think about this. So the UK Climate Change Act 2008 introduced clauses for climate resilience, building climate adaptation in the UK. And this has led to the UK government completing a UK-wide climate change risk assessment every 5 years, followed by a national adaptation program to plan and program how to then adapt to the risks identified for the country. And all of the risk assessments undertaken so far provide a wealth of information that you will find useful in your own risk assessments. And in fact, we should all be using this information to inform our thinking, and we do it in our own process. In terms of progress, while the wealth of information has increasingly increased and improved in the UK, and it's amazing that we have that resource. Overall, as a country, we haven't done enough to adapt to climate change. And this has been highlighted by the UK Climate Change Committee, Adaptation Subcommittee, who recently have actually told us that we need to be prepared to cope with extreme weather as a result of at least 2 degrees of warming by 2050s. And other things to think about is the UK Green Government commitment for adaptation. While I appreciate not many of you will have to report under this commitment, I actually find it quite useful because it provides a good framework of things to think about, and you know, it indicates that government departments, but it could be useful for you as well. We need to start with having like a climate change adaptation strategies across our states and operations, so not just the states, and that we must conduct a climate change risk assessment and then develop a plan again, and also that we need to establish really clear lines of accountability so that internally but also externally we are able to report on those risks as well as escalate those risks, and really important having the right governance in place as well. And so what have we done in MOT? Well, we actually been thinking about climate resilience for quite some time, even before the Climate Change Act introduced climate resilience clauses. We develop our own climate risk identification tool that we call the Climate Impact Risk Assessment Methodology, or CIRAM, back in 2010. We based the methodology on MOD's wider risk management policy. So again, this might be something for you to think about. You can look at your wider policy and processes on risk management and think how to then integrate the analysis of climate risks into your existing processes. And at the time, we also consider advice by the UK Climate Impacts Programme on identifying and manage risks. So we combine both of them, develop CIRAM, and it's been designed to understand the risks at the local level. So we complete the analysis at the establishment level, and we follow the UK Climate Change Act cycle. So we complete full CIRAM reviews like every 5 years, as well as we've got an internal target of like completing light touch annual reviews to keep on top of the monitoring of those risks. And we aim to understand a series of risks, for example, direct and indirect risks. Direct will be like direct damage, for instance, potentially caused by a flood, and indirect will be if that flood was to affect the local and the wider road network, how that might impact upon us. And the way we do this is like informing this climate risk assessment with science or with robust data as advised by the UK government, and we follow a 4-stage process that I'm about to explain. During the first stage, we collect a range of scientific evidence available for the location where a particular establishment is located. I have included here a few of the data sources that we explore that you might also find useful yourselves on your risk analysis. We do explore more than this, but I couldn't fit them all in the slides. It's busy enough as it is, but yeah, really important to investigate that existing data, and the UK is amazing for this sort of thing, and we do the same for overseas locations as well, but obviously it requires a bit more research finding the data for our overseas locations. And as part of that, we do explore potential risks already for a number of areas such as access and recreation, and if it's identified that we need to engage with James about this, then James will get invited invited to the second stage, which is a climate risk identification workshop, and in summary, is a collective and collaborative workshop where we identify together what the potential risks might be for the establishment, as well as whether there is anything we need to change in our management to build resilience. And if James couldn't be there, or any other of the relevant experts, then during the third stage, the post-workshop review stage, there is a period of consultation where we engage, or the establishments engage with those that couldn't be there, and you know, we finish improving and shaping the list of potential climatic risks for that particular establishment, as well as thinking about the actions. And the output from both from the second and third stage is the climate resilience risk register that includes the risks, the climatic risks for the establishment, as well as the actions and who is the owner of that action. And we also try to think about the opportunities, if there are any. And when it comes to the actions, we think, or at least we tell establishments to think not just about hard infrastructure actions such as building flood defenses, but we want them to think beyond that. We want them to think about what behaviors might need changing, which policy processes and plans need to integrate climate resilience. We want them to think about early warning systems, business continuity. We want them to think about green infrastructure that Andy is going to talk to you about, and wider nature-based solutions. So we want them to think about many different types of actions that will help us manage that risk in the short, medium, and long term. And the final stage is about the establishment using those items, and that includes mainstreaming climate resilience within existing risk and state management plans and processes, so incorporating that climate resilience risk registers into them, using it to inform those processes. But it's also about escalating the risks as appropriate, because there'll be risks that they will not fall exactly within the establishment's responsibility to manage, or they might need help of something else to manage that risk, such a potential change in contract or a change in policy. And it's really important that they monitor their risks and that they complete their reviews, not only to understand or to build our understanding of the risk, but also if the actions are still adequate, or if the actions need to be adjusted. And a key thing with all of this is being flexible, because while we know these streams are increasing in intensity and frequency, we don't always know exactly by when. So we need, or how intense, how bad they could get. So it's really important to be flexible and adapt, adjust your actions as you go as well. And obviously we've been doing this for some time, so we've been learning along the way what else we needed. We do keep the SIRAM tool updated on a regular basis. Recently we've been testing with some local authorities and local resilience forums how we might work, getting them engaged in the SIRAM process. As part of our process, we always investigate any information that these groups might have available to inform as well that climatic report that we put together in the first stage. But it's only recently that we started testing how we might work, getting them invited to our workshops. So far, we only done this on a few Navy sites or Navy items, but it's gone really well. We realized we needed needed to develop a process as well to monitor how we were doing. And so we've done that. We also realized that our project teams needed more information, more guidance about how to incorporate climate resilience within projects, plans, and programs. So we created a climate resilience section or checklist within MOD sustainability appraisal process, and we are currently doing a bit more work on this because it's actually more complex than it sounds. And for some of those plans and projects, more details actually required per asset. But at the same time, we've got teams that they say, oh, the climate resilience risk register is too detailed. We want less detail. So we also develop a strategic analysis tool to enable us to bring all of those items together and provide a strategic picture for the whole state, but also for a particular customer, such as the Navy, but also for a particular establishment, because it helps us very quickly aggregate and bring up the top 10 risks for a particular establishment, for instance. And we also realize we need to or we needed, because we realized of this some time back, that is very useful using geographical spatial systems to help us visualize those risks. This is still a work in progress. We had a few issues around our IT security and downloading data sets from the CEDA catalog, for instance. But we've got already some data sets mapped, such as flooding. And here I should say, actually, I notice on your stakeholders, you've got organizations such as Historic Environment Scotland and National Trust, and if I remember well, those organizations, they do have developed EIS tools themselves, which are very useful, and you might want in the future to invite them along to present what they've done as well on climate resilience. And last, this is not my tool. It's been developed by our central policy team, but they have developed a wider defense climate risk assessment methodology that is going to be informed by CIRAM, but many other things as well. And I'm putting the link to the national or the office guidance on this that they follow to develop the tool. So what does this mean for outdoor recreation? I've got a few slides now that are going to have quite a bit of detail for you to go back on your own time, but I'm going to present just the summary. But the way I started this, I thought, well, let me look a little bit what you do, as a whole, and just looking at your objective here for outdoor activities to remain accessible, safe, and environmentally responsible. I thought straight away, well, all of that is going to be affected by climate change. So obviously outdoor, I mean, what you do is outdoors, and is already, affected or influenced by weather. So if climate change is exacerbating already the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, is, I think, like clear that it's going to affect generally everything that you do. As I told you earlier, all of the extremes are intensifying. This means that wetter periods are becoming wetter, drier periods are becoming drier, and activities are going to be outdoor recreation activities are going to be impacted by this, such as kayaking. There will be as well, or there are already ongoing, average changes that might also have an impact, such as a later or earlier leaf fall that you might need to take into account in your management. There are also issues with consecutive events. So there have been instances in the past where we had a series of storms, one after another, that each storm was not identified by the Met Office as a stream storm. However, collectively and consecutively, they led to issues with flooding, and this could cause not just major flooding, but other issues that you could consider minor, for instance, just saturated ground, that could also have an impact on outdoor activities such as off-roading, and this could be an issue for us, for instance, in places such as Salisbury Plain, not just from a safety point of view of the users, but also because it could increase the damage to the designations, nature conservation designations of the plain. And obviously, the settings where your outdoor recreation infrastructure provision is located are at risk, and you need to identify the risks to these areas. Again, access and safety might be affected. There'll be consequences for maintenance, your environmentally and sustainability objectives, and you might realize you need new infrastructure or new ways of providing that infrastructure, for which at times you might need funding. And I don't know if you pick up from my early slide from the UK Committee on Climate Change, as I want to be fast through that as well. But there is not funding allocated for climate resilience as we speak. And all of this is going to affect user demand and preferences. So it's something that you need to think about as well. And you might need to think about whether you need to provide new activities, diversify what you offer, and provide alternative activities, and be flexible about it. So if you normally provide I don't know, like snow activities, for instance, and then there is a particularly warm year, be prepared for that. Be prepared to provide an alternative in case there isn't enough snow for that snow activity to carry on. And then some other thoughts. So extreme sports are increasing in popularity, and obviously all of this extreme weather could be seen as an opportunity, but only if managed safely. So I suppose you could argue, you know, maybe not all is negative, and certainly our establishments sometimes bring like you know, many like innovative ways of like dealing with all of this. And ultimately what I just provided to you is obviously a very quick like summary and snapshot, but similar to us, I think your risks are gonna be quite linked to different locations. They're gonna be organization specific, they're gonna be activity specific, but there might be some common themes, such as the importance of business continuity and having robust early warnings in place. It is proof that early warnings save lives. However, of course, not everyone might be listening to you. So it's really important that you educate the public, the users of your outdoor recreation infrastructure, as well as that you work with them to identify the risks and how best to manage the risks. So in case I haven't been strong enough on this, I do think working together is key. And for me, climate resilience is not just about building new things. It's about doing things different as well. And part of that is improving the way we work together to identify and manage those risks. And an example, there's a lot of detail there for you to go back to, but what I wanted to pick up here is the fact that one of our training areas, quite a few years ago already, they experienced what it was considered a once in a lifetime flood, and this once in a lifetime flood actually happened twice in the space of 2 years. And I'm telling you this because as part of your risk analysis and preparation, planning, management, you need to think that you might identify risks that actually happen before you think they are going to happen, and that you have to also be prepared for the unexpected. So be flexible on that management. And the other thing, again, repeating myself here, working together, we were able to restore this area by working together with many different stakeholders, including Natural England, who are obviously on the call today as well. And just a few more examples for you to go back to, read on your own time. And I pick up on two images because I wanted to tell you that obviously all of this is very overwhelming. No one wants, that the climate changes. It might even seem scary at times, but outdoor recreation infrastructure can be done in a way that not only increases the resilience of your organization and your services, what you do, but also the resilience of the wider community, such as those football pitches in South Africa and the skate park in Denmark. So to close, the climate is already changing. It's critical that we build climate resilience, including consideration of fall weather extremes. You need to identify how this might impact on everything that you do. It's not just an infrastructure problem, it's a cross-cutting issue. Collaboration is key, as soft adaptation measures are, like the green infrastructure that Andy is going to talk to you about. And we need to consider climate, we and you, we all need to consider climate resilience in very early stages of the decision-making process. So I know we are the cause and we are at risk, but we are also part of the solution. Think about those outdoor recreation opportunities that will increase the resilience, not just of your organization, but the wider community as well, and work with the wider community to define what those opportunities might be. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Begonia. Thank you ever so much. Vast array of information there. If you've got any questions off the back of Begonia's fantastic presentation, do stick them in the chat, please, and we will get to them after Andy's presentation. Fantastic. Andy, right, well, I will hand over to yourself. Thank you.
Okay, hiya. Just to check that you're seeing the...
Yeah, we can see your presentation and we can hear
good.
you, Andy. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
So, hi everyone. Let's introduce I'm Andy Mackintosh. I work for Natural England as a senior specialist in public access and recreation, covering such things as sort of rights of way, and it's also the interaction of sort of public access with our other work, including the impacts of sort of recreation on biodiversity, and the interaction of sort of highways and habitats law and those sort of various areas. Over 10 years ago now, it's that shock to me, I helped sort of with part 6 of this publication, which is available online. I'm sure we'll be supplying links later. The Natural England and the RSPB's Climate Change Adaptation Manual. It's a collection of chapters based on major habitat types and protected species, and then it's also got sections on green infrastructure, geology, and access and recreation, which is part 6, and that's the bit I put together. So part 6 describes the potential impact of climate change on a range of sort of public access resources, recognizing that access to the environment is very dependent on physical infrastructure like footpaths, cycle paths, parks, accessible areas, and green spaces, and these resources are certain to be affected significantly by the events of climate change. So the chapter, part 6 itself, is a sort of overview of the impacts and possible adaptation responses, and also sort of case studies and sort of a good practice at the time. It was briefly updated in 2020, but certainly in putting this presentation together, I'm acutely conscious it needs further updates, and that's something that could be a potential outcome of this webinar, is that we can look at updating it further in the future. So I'll give a brief run through of the part 6 itself, which is the section on access and recreation. Have a quick look at some hopefully relevant current tools and have a quick think about the areas to think about in the future. The photo, by the way, is a section of the south path leading down to the southwest coast path that will fall into the sea. And I think the sign was saying, don't go beyond this barrier and fall over the cliff. So moving on. Yeah, so the Begonia's already sort of gone through these sort of major sort of drivers sort of and sort of characteristics of the changing climate, sort of longer, warmer, drier summers, milder winters, high precipitation, more frequent extreme weather events, rising sea levels, more storm surges. And in 2011, Scottish National Heritage identified two main types of pressure on access to recreational resources from these climate change drivers. Chronic pressures from ongoing climate trends and acute pressures from extreme weather events, such as sort of storm surges. These in turn sort of translate to sort of widespread and more predictable chronic impacts and less predictable, more localized acute impacts, such as sort of storms. So the impacts on access resources themselves can also be sort of direct or indirect. By direct, it means that direct impacts will commonly include the immediate effects of physical conditions and processes like the effects of weathering and subsequent erosion. Indirect sort of more can include such things as behavioural responses to climate change, such as changes in recreation patterns or changes in land use or changes in types of vegetation and their impacts on access resources. The chapter itself looks at as you can see here, looks at the driver, the cause, and more frequent extreme weather events, for instance, the consequences, the potential impacts, and then goes on to look at the adaptation responses. Moving on. Also, and obviously very important to the impact of sort of climate change on public access resources is the immediate location and the physical characteristics of the resources themselves or where they're situated. And the vulnerability of a site or a route, the impacts of climate change should also vary according to location and physical, geological characteristics. Obviously, by this we mean sort of landscape and smaller topography within which a recreational route or area is located, and this will influence its exposure and vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. An obvious example are sort of upland areas throughout the United Kingdom, which tend to experience more extreme weather events anyway, and will often be and access resources such as paths will be located on steeper slopes than thinner soils. Consequently, they're likely to be more vulnerable to the effects of weathering and erosion than those in lowland areas, but then low-lying areas themselves may be more susceptible to waterlogging and flooding, and routes and areas on the coast will be more at risk from coastal flooding and erosion associated with sea level rise. So just a quick bulleted list there is just a quick some of the major sort of physical sort of parameters that obviously affect the scale and impact of climate change effects. Degree and angle of slope along or along a path, sort of longitudinally and in cross section, amount of shading by vegetation along a route, which can affect rainfall interception and exposure to other weathering agents. The amount and type of surface cover this will influence the cohesion of the surface, runoff characteristics, and susceptibility to sort of rainfall events and frost action. Hydrological features such as rivers, streams, and marshes, bogs, etc. will influence how much of a route or area is susceptible to waterlogging. And obviously, drainage is a major factor in the ongoing maintenance of access resources such as path. And the underlying sort of soil geology would also another sort of major factor. So the chapter goes on to look at sort of adaptation responses, and the responses are likely to be very familiar to all those working, to all those who manage sort of access networks across the country, but it's the normal parameters that are sort of changing due to climate change. There's lots, it's a good point to say, there's lots of existing good practice out there already, particularly in managers whose environments include such areas such as the uplands and areas that flood, i.e. those areas that already experience the effects of climate change, and other areas which inevitably experience such conditions, such as uplands, coastal areas, etc. Some of the key factors within the adaptation responses, this is on the right there: design and materials, providing more resilient surfaces, high capacity drains, defence structures, but often at a higher cost. But over in the long run, they can be sort of cost effective. Drainage is obviously a key issue, as I mentioned earlier, and designing for the future, good knowledge of local hydrology and behaviours of systems is obviously sort of really important. Access furniture is often in the front line of a sort of major sort of flooding or storm events. And again, more resilient designs such as bridges with wider spans, drains with wider apertures, and different locations if possible. Route location, that I mean really, if you've got existing routes, they can be difficult, particularly if you're looking at things such as the English rights of way system. That can be difficult to change an existing route, or can be sort of costly and sort of time consuming, but it can be done by diversions if it's not lost altogether. But if designing for a new route, then obviously where to put a new route, looking ahead at the sort of impacts of climate change is important. Management and ongoing maintenance are obviously key issues as well. And also put down here statutory responses. By this I mean, I mentioned sort of legal avenues such as diverting a right of way or a traffic regulation order to control the type of traffic on a route, maybe seasonal, but also looking at sort of more legislative sort of responses to climate change, such as the with coastal access, we have the facilities to roll back in the face of erosion, and also the Countryside and Rights of Way Act provides for restrictions on access land, particularly if there's fire risk. And resource planning is just how, I suppose, it's what the chapter's aimed at really, and how managers, access and recreation managers, can build climate change adaptation into management and maintenance. The chapter goes on to look at several case studies as what with from the time, what with the post 2014 and between 2014 and 20, we had some quite significant flood events. And one of these is the looking at the sort of repeat floods in the Lake District from 2005, 7 and 9, and particularly significant when the Storm Desmond in 2015 and 16 was severe impacts on infrastructure and the local economy, in particular the visitor economy. And sort of in recognition of this, the Cumbria Countryside Access Fund was set up following the 2015 floods with government funding, recognising how important outdoor recreation was to the tourist economy of the area. So initially then about 3 million was allocated to Lake District National Park, with further £500,000 going to Cumbria County Council and Canals and Rivers Trust. The National Park went on to use the resources from the fund help resulting programme called the Routes to Resilience in sort of 2017, and that work has been carried on in the Lake District by the work of Fix the Fells and Forward Planning. You can see examples of how it affected sort of public access here, closed paths, damaged infrastructure. But the work on the left here is a very, very popular path around Cat Bells near Keswick in Lake District, and shows some after the path had been washed away, putting in a sort of a wider culvert to cope with the sort of the immediate effects of these small streams there, and all that work was carried on all along that path. From the same storm events elsewhere in the country, this is in West Yorkshire, it's at East Keswick near Leeds. The same storm event washed out sort of a bridleway. The top of the bridleway is here where that red arrow is. There was lots of runoff and lots of water going down the bridleway, which gullied out, running down towards the River Wharfe. lots of water running down the main road. So obviously the effects of the transport infrastructure here, but pouring all the water straight into this this bridleway. And I mentioned earlier, the physical characteristics of a route are very important. Obviously, this goes down a very steep slope down towards the river wharf at the bottom there. So that's the initial damage you can see on the left there. And the solution here was to put in an engineering solution which had a sort of next to the road. It was a porous surface. So as the rain came down off the road, not from the slope above, it hit the porous surface, then went down into collection tanks down to the underneath the porous surface, which then diverted it into a drainage system which takes it down the side of the bridleway, which in itself had been resurfaced. Another case study was looking at sort of wildfire management. Hotter and drier summers bring with them the higher risk of wildfire and greater severity of fires. And warmer summers may also lead to behavioural changes such as more visitors, and recreation is a major ignition source, whether it's accidental or deliberate. And there's also a correlation between sort of wildfire and access routes. This is using example of how to address this from the Peak District National Park. Like in 2008, there was research into data collection, modelling, and vulnerability score for different habitats, and this built up an indication of fire risk. And this was brought together to inform what is now the Fire Severity Index, which is used to inform when to close open access areas on typically on sort of moorland. For the past, it's over now due to the wet weather, but for several months in the Peak District and other upland areas in the country, it has been under these a very high fire severity index. One way of addressing or one way of managing behaviours in response to public space protection orders, which sort of can cover sort of large areas of moorland and restricting the use of such things as sort of barbecues. But an issue with these is how to enforce them once they're in place. So from there, just a quick mention of the I mentioned earlier, one of the other sections in the handbook is green infrastructure, and that too looks at the varying types of green infrastructure and how climate change will affect that. But also it looks at the role of green infrastructure and climate change mitigation, how it can help mitigate the effects of climate change. So managing temperature, managing water supply, flooding, surface water, reducing soil erosion, and helping species adapt as well. And it's also a way of a positive way of managing sort of people as well. Sort of linked to green infrastructure, it's also looking at sort of public access as part of the sort of works done to as part of climate change adaptation and mitigation. Just a couple of examples here. The top right photograph of the path running along the bank is a place at Alkborough Flats in North Lincolnshire, which is a managed retreat site to manage coastal flooding, which is so a large area of farmland had been identified which could in response to sort of storm surges in the Humber estuary, a large area is identified which could sort of flood behind the defence systems. That gave the opportunity, despite there being some loss of sort of public access, that gave the opportunity to put sort of new and accessible public footpaths in bird ties, accessible routes for sort of wheelchair users and other people with mobility issues. And so that was, you got a chance to plan from the start there to sort of improve public access. And the same goes for, again, for the looking at the same event in Leeds, the flood works after the two subsequent sort of events in Leeds, major events in 2015 caused a lot of flooding in the sort of West Yorkshire area. This is the Transpennine Trail going across sort of a new bridge in Leeds. So there's lots of public access infrastructure within the city and going out to the urban fringe. So in fact, this is sort of looking at sort of I mentioned earlier about legislative and sort of planning approaches to sort of responding to climate change. And one I mentioned was the Marine and Coastal Access Act in 2009, which sort of enabled coastal access, and that included the ability to roll back, as you can see from the top right photograph, what is now the King Charles III coast path is obviously needs to sort of roll back into the farmland beyond, and that is enabled within the legislation. Another one, again, you mentioned the Climate Change Act 2008, and that sort of one result of that are climate change action plans for local authorities, and it seemed really sort of important to get one major part of that is the sort of transport network, and at one end of the transport network are sort of rights of way and green infrastructure. So it's important to get access resources considered in local authorities' sort of climate change action plans. Speaking of local authorities, one particular work that's been developed by the Environment Agency is as a way of responding to climate change risk is sort of adaptation pathways, and this was developed by the Environment Agency and also the ADEPT, which is the local government association of directors of the environment, economy and planning and transport, mouthful. But adaptation pathways enable local places to better plan for future flooding and coastal change and adapt to future climate hazards. It's a sort of a stages of response and feedback and how to respond and plan for climate change. There's lots and lots of guidance within that, and ADEPT have produced sort of toolkits for local authority planners across the range of public services. So it's sort of applicable to all types of access resources, transport, rights of way, open spaces, green infrastructure. There's particular focus on providing a sort of a rapid response as well, about how to quickly sort of respond to events. And critical parts of this are looking at sort of trying to identify thresholds beyond at which point action needs to be taken, and what the adaptation options are once these thresholds are exceeded. And it then goes on to look at new practices would have a different threshold, and one of the main things looking at here is the interdependencies that your particular resource needs to identify in response to sort of managing for climate change. So I'll have a quick look at some sort of tools, sort of current useful tools for that might be helpful in planning and looking at the effects and potential impacts of effects of climate change. This is Natural England's green infrastructure map. At the moment, it's quite busy here because I've put all the this is an area where I live in West Yorkshire, Hebden Bridge, which is extremely susceptible to flooding, and it shows all the access recreation resources available, from open access areas to the public rights of way network, also accessible woodland and green spaces. And along the valley, you can see the sort of red areas. These are the areas that sort of flood regularly and are at most risk of flooding. You can see the relationship between the access resources and the potential impacts of sort of climate change. So I can provide links to these. A couple of other tools that I've got, what we'll go into detail here. The National Trust, as it was a couple of years ago, we looked at, there was a presentation of the National Trust at the ORN conference, and they've developed and continue to develop a climate hazard tool, based very much looking at sort of areas and particular it brings together geomorphological and meteorological data to assess risk. Example I've got here is an area in West Yorkshire, and that I can read it there, but it looks at potential parameters include storm damage, overheating, storm damaging current and in the future, slope failure, which is the one ticked here, soil heave, and it has a range of parameters like that. And by clicking on them, you can see the potential risk going into the future. Along with that, Met Office data obviously informs that as well, but Met Office also developed a tool to explore the climate of your local authority and the climate risks based on the local authority level. Sort of linking those two things together, going back to the Hebden Bridge area, there's the green infrastructure map I just showed you with a sort of LiDAR image showing the characteristics of the area, which is basically large areas of moorland and upland grazing, and then very steep sided slopes with an awful lot of infrastructure in the bottom. I mean, it's sort of turning it round slightly about looking at the impacts of climate on sort of access infrastructure and resources. There's also how does access infrastructure sort of contribute to the effects of climate change? It's something to particularly thought about around here. We have a very, very dense rights of way network, and as you can see, it goes down. It feeds down into the valley bottom. So, what are the actual effects of paths themselves as conduits of, for instance, rainwater? And the example you see on the right is a bridleway leading down to another footpath straight into the river, which then goes straight into the town of Hebden Bridge at the bottom here. So just another way of looking at it. So it's moving on slightly here. So really just to wind up really, so it's really sort of looking ahead. I've been very conscious when putting this together that the 2014/20 guidance is looking out of date, and there's been quite a bit of research done over that time, and some more good practice about. One of the websites I looked at was the Petersham National Path, which has sort of looked at all its sort of resources with a view to climate change vulnerability assessment, and that includes access and recreation infrastructure and the path network. So it looks at direct and indirect impacts and the range, and so it follows very much the path taken by the part 6. There's also, very quickly, won't go into it at all, quick looking at sort of current research, particularly around sort of behaviours. I think there's quite a bit more research being done on how sort of people will and might respond to sort of climate change, and lots of sort of strategic planning as well. For instance, I mentioned the Fix the Fells work in examples to Lake District, and they continue to sort of build climate change adaptation into their forward planning. So really, just to sort of end up, perhaps a few questions: how does sort of climate change affect your area of work, and if you have any sort of relevant sort of case studies, new areas to look at, suggest new areas to look at, sort of research, and perhaps new areas of guidance and new tools. So I'll leave it there and stop sharing, and hand back to James.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks so much. Thank you for the overview. I would imagine there's going to be quite a flurry of downloads now for the manual. Lots of interest, I'm sure. We have some time for some Q&A. I've kept an eye on the chat. The only thing going in the chat are the links to the various bits and pieces that Andy has been highlighting, which is really useful. So do refer to that for some of that extra information. I've had to scribble down a few questions as you've both been presenting, and you've both referred to various open data sources. And Begonia, thank you. You gave us quite a list of potential locations for information. Do you find, in your experience, that information that you can access, and this is to both of you, is accessible if you're not necessarily a specialist in climate change or any type of in that area? And if not, are there means and ways that perhaps are there tools in which it becomes more accessible, dare I say, through the use of AI summaries or something like that?
Andy, would you like to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, the ones I referred to are all sort of readily available. But it's a good question how easy they are to use. Certainly, there's our GI mapping all fairly self-evident and have sort of online sort of help available to use them, and but I think it is fairly straightforward. I mentioned the Adept toolkit. That's really is quite detailed, and it's something I haven't gone into detail. I've been to a presentation about it, and there's an awful lot of information there, but there's also an awful lot of guidance as well. So it's and there are sort of workshops, recordings, videos, and things. So that's all quite accessible. Certainly, but if from our point of view, if there are sort of issues, sort of using sort of open data, and there's all the data behind the GI mapping is openly available. But should there be sort of issues using it, Natural England GI section can certainly help there.
Thank you. So from my point of view, well, there are, I suppose, different issues around accessibility. So when you look at the UK climate projections, for instance, it's easy for our team or the climate resilience team to access that data using the Met Office climate projections interface. However, then when we go to the CETA catalog, then there have been issues with our IT security on doing data download. So that's one of one of those access issues that we are trying to resolve. The other issue is whether the data, I suppose, is easy to understood or access extracted by the users of our establishments. Initially, when we put the methodology together, the intention was that they will be able to do everything themselves eventually. However, when it comes to the UK climate projections, for instance, they still find the data on the actual UK climate projections interface too complex for them to extract. So we continue to collect that data for them and coach them. And as part of the wider work that the Met Office is doing in making the data more accessible from that point of view, they more recently developed, for instance, more training, webinars, as well as they develop a tool specific for local authorities that can also help our establishments and others understand what that climate projections data might mean for a particular authority. So work is underway, to make a lot of this information more accessible from that sort of understanding and accessibility point of view for someone who hasn't got a climate risk background. And I put the links to both in one of my earlier slides, but there are many others, of course. And then there are organizations, I just mentioned National Trust, that they are also doing their own tools and interpretation of the data to then help others access and understand from that understanding point of view data. Does that answer the question?
I think so, Begonia. Thank you. I think it's a case of exploring, isn't it, and looking how various other organisations are working with information and having a bit of a dabble, I suppose, really seeing what's out there. Thank you, Andy. Okay, I think a couple of chats going in. Paul, good to see you online. Fairly familiar question for many, I would imagine. Paul's highlighted that wet and warm equals more vegetation growth, which clearly from an access perspective can be quite obstructive. I mean, do either of you have any views on strategies for dealing with this other than just cut more, I suppose, is the short answer. But yeah, bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure as Paul well knows, it's a major issue, and that ongoing maintenance of say rights of way paths is already a sort of a an area where resources are very strained, and sort of and looking into the future, it's easy to say put more resources aside to sort of cut more. Obviously, if that can be done by highlighting the importance of access, recreation, rights and networks within such things as climate change action plans, and maybe a role for rights of way improvement plans there, highlighting the important, looking to the future and sort of highlighting the need for more resources or allocation of resources in that area. And that's something that sort of needs to be done, and also effective use of volunteers. And if you don't, obviously, you're going to get more complaints about sort of blocked paths. So it is a difficult one.
Absolutely. And talking about funding money there, Begonia, you earlier on, you touched upon the government objectives, the UK government, the UK greening objectives. And at that moment, I thought, was there any hook funding opportunities there? But am I right in saying you said there's nothing allocated from a funding perspective at the moment for climate resilience?
Not yet, but what we advise our state users is that they use the climate risk information to influence all of their business cases and to prioritize them in the first place, because obviously resources are tight. So if you've got X projects, to provide funding for, use the climate risk information to help you with that prioritization where you're going to tackle first, or you're going to invest first, and incorporate that into those wider business cases. And with regards to the strategies for the grass, I obviously, I'm not an expert in outdoor recreation myself, but that reminds me of similar issues that we have identified ourselves. And for us, what we have learned is that we need our state contracts to be more flexible, to be more proactive rather than reactive. Again, achieving that is easier said than done, because there might not be, funding either to make sure the entirety of the contract can be proactive. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Begonia. Thank you. Lee Newton has kindly pointed out in the chat bar that, yes, the ORN Academic Research Group has had a presentation recently from the Environment Agency with regards to use of data, etc., for climate change, climate resilience modelling. So do keep your eyes peeled for any more ARG Academic Research Group events, and there will be more discussion, I'm sure, about using the data that we've mentioned to support your climate resilience planning. Andy, you finished on a few questions there, and you touched upon the fact that there's probably a need to review the manual. Dare I say, would you be open to an influx of emails from those online as to where suggestions, case studies, whatever it may be, as to how the manual could be updated?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
And also,
I was also wondering if it'd be helpful if produced, because obviously there's the presentations have got various links and things in. I've been looking at various sort of links to sort of research and things, and so maybe it would be helpful at some point to just provide a sheet sort of between ourselves to circulate for all, with sort of links to current research, useful links and things.
Absolutely. I mean, it may be something that we can discuss behind the scenes, and perhaps that could be another ORN event, discussing any updates for the manual, perhaps. Begonia highlighted that climate resilience is not just about talking about infrastructure, about our sites. It is about placing importance on behaviours, and that's relevant to from our perspective. As we work within our various organisations or various businesses, and also important to encourage appropriate behaviours from a user group perspective as well. And I'm sure many of you will be raising your eyebrows at the thought of having another line of communication that we're trying to engage with the public through. Andy, is there anything within the manual that does touch upon public engagement, education from what was the word? From I can't remember the word that I highlight down, but certainly from a management perspective. We're managing the infrastructure. Is there anything in the manual about engaging and informing?
Not so much, I guess, at the moment. I mean, I'll have to go back and check, but it's the original manual's from back from before 2014 now, so it was a quite light touch update in 2020, so it's probably an area it needs to expand.
Yeah. Okay. And Begonia, you've discussed the CIRAM, risk assessments on quite a big scale, but as we discussed about prior to the webinar kicking off, it's really important to recognise that it's very much a process that can be scaled down to very site-specific, small sites, site-specific issues. And as I just mentioned as well, it's not just about infrastructure as well; it is about behaviour. So, if you're an organisation that isn't necessarily managing sites, but you're perhaps encouraging community engagement with the local environment, with outdoor recreation, or if you're you lead guided tours or some such, there's still an opportunity for you to engage with a climate resilience risk assessment to make sure that your business is protected for the longer term. Is that a fair interpretation?
Totally, very fair. Shall I expand?
Oh yeah, I mean, you're very welcome to expand. Yeah.
No, totally. Because in fact, when we complete our climate impact risk analysis, we don't just focus on the infrastructure. We think about the operations of a particular establishment, everything that they do, and how that might be impacted by climate. And it might be the case that they already had to deal with some extreme events and they had to adapt their activities to continue with that activity, or they might have to stop the activity and be flexible and plan it for another time when it was safer to do so. And as part of all of this, as I was saying, we do explore the risks that might be affecting the local authorities and the road network, travel and transport, even rail, how all of that might impact upon us, and things such as services as well coming from elsewhere, such as energy provision, water availability, and we look at it from various angles, and we look as well, even when there isn't an immediate like damage on our stewardship provision, how it might link with that, and thinking about the future, adapting our management so we continue to be a good steward of the state, and obviously continue to provide safe access, or thinking about how to build the resilience of our various habitats. So it's quite, as I said, I've got a big playground. It's quite fun.
Thank you, Begonia, and thank you both. I've just noticed the time. We are coming to a close. So thank you both ever so much for your presentations and for your contributions here. Really fantastic.